invite the feeling, just put your pinky rings up to the moon. Girls, what y'all trying to do? Tell me what you're trying to do. 24 karat magic in the air. Head to toe so clear. Put your pinky rings up to the moon. Girls, what y'all trying to do? 24 karat magic in the air. Head to toe so clear. Look out.
Good afternoon. Please welcome back to the stage John Blumenthal and Jay Lund.
Sign is vital.
Are we? Yeah, all right. No pressure, Jay.
No.
Just you and me and two couches in a room full of 800 people. This is great. Well, thank you. So we're talking modern streetcar today. My name's John Blumenthal. I'm a partner at the Baird Home Law Firm here in Omaha. We've got Jay Lund with Green Slate Development. Jay's one of the managing principals at Green Slate, and more recently has been involved as the founder of Modern Streetcar Advocates. So thanks, Jay, for joining us to talk about streetcar today.
Absolutely.
So just a couple of quick pieces of housekeeping. I believe your brochure says debate, so I don't think we had set this up for a debate today, so you're not going to see Jay and I. We may arm wrestle when we're done, but that's just for our own time. But this is just more meant to be a panel discussion, and then if we have a little bit of time for questions at the end, we'll take some questions at the end. I've got a whole laundry list of things that I think people have asked me and want to know about the streetcar, so we'll try and hit those all. So Jay, tell me first about Modern Streetcar Advocates. What is Modern Streetcar Advocates?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the platform here. As you'll tell here, I'm pretty passionate about the topic, and I think it's really important for this room and specifically to what everybody does in the commercial real estate industry for a living. So Modern Streetcar Advocates is an advocacy group. And it was born in November. Actually, prior to that, I actually remember sitting on this stage last year on another panel, and there was a lot of discussion about transportation and transit, and streetcar came up quite a bit. Immediately after that, or soon after that, we had the mayoral election, and the issue became highly politicized. And so the root cause, or the reason that we started the Modern Streetcar Advocates was to shift the conversation to talk about streetcar with the facts. And we also wanted to create a place where we could bring all the advocates together, and which kind of never existed before.
So you talk about the facts, and we want to get people to know what are the facts about the streetcar. So let's start there. We hear different terms bandied about. We hear trolley, we hear light rail, we hear streetcar. What do you envision Omaha's streetcar looking like, being like? We see Kansas City streetcar. Would it be comparable to that? And what would the Omaha streetcar be?
The short answer is yes. I mean, for any of the folks, show of hands, who's been on the Kansas City streetcar or seen it, almost exactly like that. That's about a 2-mile track. Ours is a little bit longer than that. It's about 3.5 miles long. So it's not my vision. It's something that we've been talking about in Omaha now for close to 20 years, believe it or not. There was a series of studies that came out over the last 5 years with the alternatives analysis that identified the corridor that was best suited for both BRT and streetcar, and hopefully they were handing out as you came in the door here for the afternoon is actually the official HDR sort of summary, executive summary of the advanced conceptual engineering analysis, which shows the route and talks a lot about that.
Sorry, I knew this was going to happen today. I never get talking to a panel with a cold.
I can keep rambling too because I'm good at that.
Keep going.
So
Keep going.
hopefully a lot of folks did see that coming in as they walked in the door. Believe it or not, as long as we have been talking about streetcar here, I get a question from people that I would think absolutely know for sure. They say, well, where's the streetcar go? And I'm really surprised to have to answer that question, but the route is on the map on the handout that you have, and essentially it links Midtown to downtown, and then downtown to north downtown. And the primary function of the streetcar system, or any streetcar system in the country, is economic development. And what our system does, and if you look at the map, and it hits every significant asset that our city in the commercial real estate industry has invested in over the last couple decades. And you can look at the line all the way up and down. It's the Med Center, Blackstone District, Midtown Crossing, all of our major cultural centers, the Orpheum, Mecca, and the ballpark, all of our major employers. And essentially what this does, I don't know what the real number is, but approximately $4 billion that we've invested in all these assets over the last 20 years. What we're doing is we're connecting them. And that's the primary function.
I'd give anybody $20 for a cough drop right now. Thanks. There's nothing. This will be the people are in the streetcar in my coughing fit during this. So I'm gonna try and. Oh my gosh.
Barry, thank
Barry.
you.
Don't tease me. Barry, don't go away. Get your $20. Wasn't kidding. I'm a man of my word. All right. Sorry about my coughing fit. I knew this was going to happen. I kept it together all day until I had to start to talk. So you talked a little bit about the line, and I can't kill my mic either, so you're just going to have to bear with me. You talked about the line. Where does it start and where does it stop the way we're currently envisioning this?
Right, again, so if you look at hopefully the map that's sitting in front of you, the line is about, the length of the line is about 3.5 miles long. The amount of track is actually about a little over 5 miles long as it bifurcates east of Turner Park on the Farnham-Harney couplet. But again, quite simply, it links Midtown with downtown. And when you look at, and I've talked to the HDR folks about this, is Omaha we have one of the most natural corridors out there when they look at different streetcar cities. And the question I get a lot is, well, why don't you run it to the airport, or why don't you run it to the zoo, or it should go out to South 24th Street? And I always respond.
God's country is West Omaha, as we all know.
It can go out to as far west as we want, but the reality is we have to start somewhere. And until we build that first line, we're never going to decide to make these bigger transportation decisions that we need to make, and that includes roads, and that includes bus rapid transit and other forms of transportation.
So why the streetcar as opposed to bus transit or another form of transportation, and why now? Why 2018? Why is the time right now?
Well, the first part of your question, I think maybe was a question about what's the best technology to use. So the magic of streetcar is it's fixed rail. And when you put rails in the ground, some people will say, well, that's an old technology. Why don't we have rubber-tired vehicles? But the problem with rubber-tired vehicles is they're flexible. And if you're a real estate developer, flexible is a bad thing. So when you invest in transit and it's in the ground, and you invest essentially $170 million in infrastructure, what happens, and I talked about this last year, is it's a pretty classic model. It's the way that we've developed our city for many, many decades. It's public investment occurs, and then private investment follows. And then again, why now? That's I'll give you, this is going to be a long answer, but I was sitting out in the audience this morning, and I was kind of waiting for something that happened last year where we were talking around all these topics, and and naturally transportation and transit options start coming up. So in this morning's panels, we were circling the wagon so close, but all I heard from two different panels this morning was talent. How do we recruit? How do we retain? We have a population base that is projected at 1.2 million, but we really need it to be 1.4 million. And so where do all these people come from? And so I heard a lot about, essentially it sounded like a consensus of the problems. We have a problem with talent and retention and recruitment, and we have a problem with maybe making better places, which complement that. And so I think we have a consensus on the problems. I think we need to start talking about solutions.
So what is the projected cost of the streetcar, and how do you envision it being paid for?
So that just came out a couple weeks ago from HDR in conjunction with the City of Omaha and Metro Transit. The cost is $170 million. That includes, or doesn't include, but there's a $7.5 million operating expense cost. And how do we pay for it? That's the number one thing that everybody wants to know. I haven't met really hardly anybody yet, and we're talking about the streetcar, that thinks it's a bad idea if they don't have to pay for it, naturally. So the beauty of the streetcar is it pays for itself. So when you put the tracks in the ground on those 3.5 miles, what happens is you get $2 billion worth of real estate development. So that could not be any more relevant to this room. Pull out that map, look at it. If I was still a real estate broker, I'd be looking at that map and trying to figure out how to get involved in that $2 billion worth of real estate. And the way that works is when you build $2 billion worth of real estate, you capture that value through tax increment financing. Tax increment financing pays for the streetcar.
If I live in West Omaha, I hear my neighbors say, that's great if you're in Midtown. How does that benefit the people in West Omaha, in Elkhorn, out in the West Dodge corridor?
Well, I'll go back again to today's discussion. When we talk about attracting and retaining talent for our workforce and growing our workforce, that's not a West Omaha problem. That's not an East Omaha problem. That's the city of Omaha, right? And so the other analogy I use is, a city, any city is only as strong as its core. It's like it's a body, right? You're only as strong as your vital organs. And a city that has a core that has not reached its fullest potential, that's going to permeate whether you live in Dundee or Elkhorn. You're going to have the same things to gain and the same things to lose.
So we know it's April in Omaha, and although it's beautiful out now because it's April, it's also, it's not.
I feel a pothole question.
You guessed where I was going to go. It's pothole season. We're all in the thick of swerving left and right. So the common complaint is we got to fix our own streets first. Why do the streetcar when we have a lot of road maintenance projects going on?
Well, I'll kind of give you two answers on that. The first one is you're talking about two different pots of money, so to speak. So potholes are something that, we have to deal with every year and they become highly politicized every 4 years. There is not a bucket of money sitting at City Hall that we're pulling money out of to pay for a streetcar that's going to be taken away from potholes. Again, the streetcar pays for itself if and when you build the real estate development. Potholes are a part of a larger problem. So this is not talked about a lot, but in Omaha we have about a $900 million shortfall in road repairs. So we can spend $100 million a year or whatever we want to do fixing the roads we have right now. That shortfall is not going to go away. We're kicking that can down the road. So ultimately we need a much bigger solution. We have a big a gap in what we need to provide for public transit. We have this big pothole problem. At a certain point in time, we're going to have to make a $1 billion+ decision as a community about how to fix these things for good.
Along those lines, alongside potholes, or they'll drive alongside potholes, but autonomous vehicles. Everybody talks about, are we even going to have cars, or will it all be self-driving cars in 10 years? So if we put in this kind of infrastructure today, are we then going to be moving towards autonomous cars? How does a streetcar work with that thought, and do we need to worry about that if we put in a streetcar next year?
Yeah, there's actually a breakout session on autonomous vehicles, and I kind of brought that question up. So this is the zinger that people like to give me. Autonomous technology works in trains the same way it does in cars. It doesn't change the mode of transit. Uber, people say Uber rideshare is going to be sort of going to make transit and public transit obsolete. That just is not the case. If you look at our streetcar system, our average car can hold about 200 people, and it comes by every 10 minutes. You don't have Ubers. They can hold 200 people. There's a fundamental difference between mass transit and private transit. Autonomous technology is great for transit. It actually, one of the panelists in the breakout said it actually could provide an opportunity for more transit, and it actually makes it cheaper to operate.
I want to come back to one thing we talked about. When you talk about retention, how is a streetcar an economic engine for a city? Or at least that's the argument I've heard you say before, that the streetcar is an economic engine for a city. Talk a little bit more about that. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of a repetition of what I said. It's linking the investments that we've already made. We're linking our core. One thing that we talk about in the city all the time is parking, right? And we spend a lot of money on parking. And then I read the paper, I love those Collier's must list. Shout out to Collier's. And I counted, there was 25 articles that was on the last must list, and at least I counted, I think 10 or 12 of them were all about the urban core. And they were all kind of talking about parking. I sent some late night emails to some people. It sounded like we were having the conversation in 2008 or 1998. It was blowing my mind that we were saying, what's the definition of insanity is repeating something over and over and expecting a different outcome. How many times are we going to sit around and talk about parking as being a barrier to job growth and to development downtown? So I'm suggesting, the national experts are suggesting, that we try something different. And we're not trying something that different. We've seen it happen. There's 20 cities with streetcars right now. Kansas City's streetcar is up and running right now. They've had $2 billion worth of development on their line. This is a crazy stat. They've doubled their ridership, 58% increase in sales on the businesses that are on the streetcar line. So this is something that's our competitors are doing, and it's something that we have to do, quite frankly, if we want to keep up.
So we just have a little bit of time left. Final word, and then maybe if we have some time for questions, we'll do some questions. But final word from you. What comes next? And two final questions. What comes next, or what should come next? 3 questions. And if everybody else here, if you wanted them to all do something at the end of today to get involved and make the streetcar happen, what would that be? So where do we go from here?
Well, what comes next is we figure out how to pay for it, and we're working on that now. What most people want to know, I mean, the reality is I think that this project is going to be decided this year. So we, as a city, we're going to be at a crossroads. We're going to have to decide, do we want to be a car-oriented urban core, or do we want to start to look at different solutions? So that decision is going to happen this year. If we decide we want to build it, the streetcar can be open in less than 4 years. So you can see the train running right by the CenturyLink Center here in 2022. What I'd ask everybody here to do is to learn about the project. A year ago during the election, you had a lot of misinformation, and I think that as real estate professionals, you all owe it to yourselves and to your clients to learn about what this project means to them and to the city. So I would just encourage everybody to, we have our website, modernstreetcaradvocates.org. You have the pamphlets that you can go through. So learn about it, and the next time you're at a bar or a restaurant or at a business meeting, you can speak about it with the facts.
Very helpful. I think this is an exciting time for Omaha, and it's an exciting idea. If we have time for one or two questions, we tried to touch on a lot. Is there anything that anybody, any questions? Jay will answer any streetcar questions you've got, so.
Is it on? It is, great. Hi, I'm Laisha Goodwin from the University of Nebraska, Omaha, and public transit has somewhat of a negative image in Omaha. People assume that, oh, if you're standing on the bus stop, you're lazy, you're an alcoholic, that kind of thing. How, if at all, do you all plan to somewhat change the perception of public transit with the installment of the streetcar?
Yep, thanks for the question. So the first answer is you get what you pay for. So in Omaha, we spend approximately $35 per capita on our bus system, on Metro Transit. The national average is more than double that. It's $75 a person. So we're spending less than half of the national average. Streetcar is primarily an economic development engine, but it's also a big piece of a larger transportation network. And we believe it's the tip of the spear. The CenturyLink Center, I think, is a great example for that. There was a lot of folks that didn't think this was a good idea until the day it opened. And that led us to be able to build a lot of other things. So if we build it and we prove that it works, I think that there's the opportunity to greatly enhance the entire system.
I think we've got our red light flashing, so thank you all very, well, we got one more question. Okay, so don't get mad at me then if what holds us up later, but we have one more.
What's the cost of riding the streetcar compared to the bus?
Well, the streetcar would be free to ride. The bus is $1.50, $1.25 to ride. So the primary goal of streetcar is ridership. That's what brings economic development. If you have 6,000 people a day on the train, you're going to have apartments and offices and retail space. So that's the idea. That's the way they do it in Kansas City.
Well, hopefully you all learn a little bit more. Again, modernstreetcaradvocates.com.org.
Yes.
Modernstreetcaradvocates.org if you'd like to learn more. Thank you to Jay Lund. Appreciate it.
Living all your day takes you so low, and on and off again, on and off again, on and off again. Oh, take me to that space when I need someone, when I'm shaking all my mind starts coming undone, when I'm on and off again, on and off again, on and off again. You turn me on like. Turn me on like.
Ladies and gentlemen, please now welcome to the stage Hal Dobb and his esteemed panel.
Take me to that place.
Well, I think there's probably one expectation I would say to my colleagues on the panel today. This is a great audience, and we're so glad to have a chance to visit with you this afternoon. But there's another event that follows this one, so I bet you we stay on time. You think?
Absolutely.
Wouldn't you like us to stay on time? I think that'll work. I'd like you all to hold your applause and give special recognition. First, on my far left, your right, Clay Smith, who's the general partner who leads Speedway Properties, and I think you may, some of you, if you're here at lunch, recall his being honored for the great space they've created in the building, the Huddle building in Lincoln. Among all of his other accomplishments, I think you're on 3 or 4 museum boards, and you've served on NET's board and all sorts of wonderful things, and active in the chamber and in the university. We appreciate you being here today. Dr. Hank Bounds is my boss in a lot of ways for the operations of our $2.6 billion university. 25 years in education. Mississippi is behind you now. You are in Nebraska, and you're bringing great ideas, and we're going to talk about one of those ideas in just a few minutes. And ladies and gentlemen, our final panelist is someone who started you off this morning and is now a resident of Omaha longer than any place else of the 4 chambers he's been associated with, 15 years. And the thing I really enjoyed about some information I read about David Brown was an article where the headline said, "Our chamber leader focused on making the city shine." And I think you'll all agree that he's a builder and a doer and a leader, and he and his team achieved being recognized as the #1 Chamber of Commerce in the United States last year. Quite an honor, don't you think? Please give them all a round of applause. So I want to start out by having each of you share a little bit of a reaction to what is called Blueprint Nebraska. Now, many of you may not have heard about this emerging, developing economic strategy for taking our state forward on a number of foundational changes that are going to have to be forged for us to grow. So, Dr. Bounds, you've been really involved in this and leading it, and I want to ask you to maybe spend 3, 4, 5 minutes as an educational commentary on what is this program, what is its achievement goal, and then I'd like to have David comment, and I'd like to have you comment as well, Clay.
Sure, thanks, Hal. So the idea is to build an economic development strategy that at its very core is by business for business. So completely business-led, supported by the university, private philanthropy. But you know, when you think about the competitive world that we live in and trying to make certain that our children and our grandchildren have the best jobs and opportunity, you really have to understand yourself. And so I think about it as a game plan, just as a sporting team would game plan their opponent. So you have to understand what you look like as compared to competitor states. And there are 10, 12, 13 states that we compete with. We don't compete with Florida. We don't compete with California for jobs and opportunities. We don't compete with New York. But there are a defined group of states that we compete with. So understanding ourselves in everything from tax policy to incentives to infrastructure, educational attainment, all of the areas, housing, workforce, all of the areas that a company would look to, would really think carefully about if they were thinking about moving to Omaha or moving to Scottsbluff. This would be a statewide effort where we would first understand ourselves, then understand our competitors, and then bring in people who can really help us to look over the horizon, think about what great looks like for the next 10 to 20 years, and then, you know, the best way to predict our future is to design it. And so this is about understanding ourselves and then designing our future.
So we're going to work at actually getting a written strategy that looks a lot further out on the horizon than maybe we have in the past.
We'll build a baseline document where we will compare ourselves in every possible category to our competitors, rank ourselves realistically, everything based on research, and then out of that build strategies to improve where we need to improve, and thinking world-class in everything that we do.
David, jump in.
So if you're here this morning, some of this probably sounds kind of familiar. We talked about Prosper 2.0, we talked about Omaha 2040 and the kind of future we're looking at. One of the key components of any of our strategies is a statement that Omaha doesn't succeed if the rest of the state doesn't succeed. And I would suggest the rest of the state doesn't succeed if Omaha isn't just kicking butt and taking names every day either. So we've got to figure out a way to do that. We believe that the business community is just chock full of great ideas, knowing how to run their businesses, what the future looks like. We know that we have top-notch research institutions and capability in this state to tell us where the current situation is. We believe that we can look into the future and figure out where we want to be, and then we can build a robust strategy that's statewide to get us there.
Well, does it take a small state with limited resources? So we do need a much more refined strategy to be competitive.
Well, we can't afford to make as many mistakes, I suppose, as some more populous states that might be perceived as wealthier states, because we only kind of get 1 or 2 bites at the apple here. If we do it wrong, go down the wrong path, we can always correct, but that just takes time. And when time costs money, and in many places time can cost you projects and impact the economy. So we believe that we can be change agents by causing change to happen, being catalytic about that change, or we can wait for change to be foisted upon us. I don't know about you, but I like change, but mostly if I'm causing it. I hate it when somebody tells me I go do
gotta guess
something.
it right.
So we're in the business really of being catalytic leaders here. How do we build a team across the state of chambers of commerce, of business people, of elected officials, of business people in the small communities as well as across the state that'll have a say in what this future can look like.
Clay, what do you think?
I'm excited. I think this is an excellent plan. It's a great idea. And Hank, why did it take 3 years to figure this out? So I'm
I've had a few other things going on.
I know you've been busy. I know you've been busy. You know, I have a unique perspective in the sense that we have been active participants with our local chamber trying to attract businesses. So we're trying to find places for them and organize incentives for them, both for development sites and also buildings. But we've also been recipients of incentives, both in this state and others. We actually operate manufacturing facilities in 4 other states. So we bought 10 companies over the last decade, or product lines, and we've had to make that location decision, where to go, where to put which businesses where. And frankly, Nebraska is woefully short on tools in our toolbox. We have TIF, as most of you know, from the economic development that happens with real estate. That's usually the only economic tool we have to help with facilities. And when you move to the incentives at the state or local chamber level, we have the Nebraska Advantage Act, and we have some job benefits. But the Nebraska Advantage Act is now 13 years old. And in your businesses, how many of your programs that were envisioned 15 years ago are still relevant today? You know, we're in a new economy, and so I think revisiting that Nebraska Advantage Act should be a critical part, and I'm sure it will be, of this plan. Almost no one likes it. The administrators of it don't like it. The legislature obviously doesn't like it. And when you receive it, it's too little,
It's a pain
too
in the-
late, and you can't use the credits.
So, Dr. Bounds, the time frame, how long has this Blueprint Nebraska idea been incubating? Where are we in terms of next steps? And what can some of the participants, if not everyone in this room, do to input at some point in time the development of this future strategy?
Sure, so let me go back and reiterate, number one, this has to be a for business by business plan. Can't be the university's plan, it can't be Omaha's plan, it can't be a policymaker's plan. It really has to be driven by business. We have gone through the process, working with the governor, working with a number of other leaders to think through who the right business leaders are across the state to populate a steering committee. That's been done. There will be about a dozen to 15 industry areas where we work, and we call them broadly industry areas. So it may be in the arts, or it may be infrastructure, it may be broadband, access to broadband, it may be access to healthcare, educational attainment. And so each one of those, we call them industry councils. We'll be over the course of the next month or so, we'll pick leaders for those. The business community will be selecting those, and then we'll populate those committees. We're raising dollars to do the research, because everything really has to be research-based. We ought to be really honest about where we are and where we are not.
It looks like about a $2 million budget is planned, and a
think
set of
so.
hearings and public input opportunities are going to be unfolded all across the state during the next 8 months.
There will be a number of community visits across the state that we'll be rolling out over the next several months. I don't want to get too far ahead of the steering committee. They'll be meeting here in the next couple of weeks, and we'll be making decisions about what this looks like. There will be surveys. We'll have electronic instruments that we'll deploy. And then one of the last outcomes is, you know, if you think about the city we're in, David, your chamber has real strong wherewithal in terms of trying to attract companies and make certain that you're meeting the needs of the companies that are here. In many places, in small towns, I come from a state that has lots of small towns, just like Nebraska has many small towns. Sometimes you're the CEO of the organization, and you're also the person that is trying to recruit someone, and you're also the person that's trying to figure out health care. And so the hope is that we'll also exit this with a connect the dots strategy for small towns, for rural and small town development over time.
I am impressed by the steering committee composition, and I don't know if there's a website yet, but soon to be, I'm sure.
We'll be rolling
So
this
people
out in the
can-
next probably month or so.
So you're getting in on the ground floor of sort of an initial announcement of this framework and strategy that a lot of people have been working hard on, and the panel's composition today, ladies and gentlemen, has been designed with not just Lincoln and Omaha in mind, but to emphasize, as a matter of fact, that we are a small state with limited resources, and as David so well said, we don't get a lot of passes at the apple. So if we're going to recruit, retain, and grow, we're going to have to get it right. So it'll take some time to do this. I want to move on to the next subject and outline it for the panel, and that is just talk about space. Building and constructing and designing not just your building, but the idea of how do you attract and retain and grow if you don't pay some attention to space. That's the places where people work. What attracts them to come and want to be productive and make this a place where they want to live and grow? What about space? Is space, should it be an objective for the developing community to think a lot more about space?
I might jump in here, Hal. I think place is the term that we've used to think about everything from what kind of community you live in, quality of life, innovation, engagement, et cetera, to the kind of buildings you have, the kind of homes you have, the kind of neighborhoods you have. We believe, and I think all the data will tell you this, and a lot of literature is telling you this, that today's college graduates will tell you first where they want to live before they tell you where they're going to go to work. And they don't really care where they go to work as long as they get to land in one of those places that they've chosen on their list. Now, that's different if you're from somewhere. If you're from Omaha, chances are you might want to come back here. But for the most part, if you look at the millennial generation, which I hate to categorize that way, but the fact is that place matters. And so we believe that in this market in particular, and I know our counterparts in Lincoln and across the state think the same way, is how do you make your community one of those places that not just businesses want to choose because you're a competitive place and maybe a productive place and potentially a profitable place, but rather a place where you can attract people.
So restaurants and buildings per se, entertainment, all fit into that.
It does fit into that, but it's also about, compare Memorial Park, which is a glorious piece of property, with Millennium Park in Chicago. Pretty much the same acreage. Think about the different uses and how those are used. So what if we could create engaged places where, so if you're part of a neighborhood, you can not only just go sit and throw a Frisbee and have fun, there's nothing wrong with that, but if you choose, you can also go to a place that engages you, engages the mind, engages the creativity. You build a place that people want to come and visit. Carry that across even architecture. Little Columbus, Indiana. Anybody been to Columbus, Indiana? Mm-hmm. Columbus, Indiana. Cummins Engine Foundation for 40 years now has provided grants to organizations who are building buildings in that community so they can hire a top 10 in the world architect to design that building. And then they put money on the table to help pay for the extra costs of building those exceptional buildings. So if you go to Little Columbus, Indiana right now, you'll find some of the most spectacular architecture in any town on the planet. It is really pretty amazing, and they did that because they wanted to create a very special place that people would remember. Imagine us doing something like that here or other towns around the state. It's about being unique, different, engaging, and a place that your residents really want to be.
Clay, what about the Huddle building?
You know, thinking about Lincoln from the same vein, we actually think it in two ways, on a micro level and a macro level. So on the macro level, the issue really is, what does the community offer for an incoming company? And you know, we in Lincoln have been blessed that we ride the coattails of the university with its culture and arts, and they have a few sporting events like volleyball, basketball, baseball, and now with Scott Frost we have football.
Oh
You
boy,
stole
here
my
comes
line,
the
but that's
controversy.
okay.
Here we
We'll
go.
get it. We'll get to that just a little later in the afternoon.
Back to the future, here we go. But we were always blessed with that. But when we added the arena, it was a cultural game changer for Lincoln because of the bars and restaurants and the activities and the office space that collected around the arena space. It really was a game changer in the way people felt about their community. And Huddle, its building on the micro level, is so different from the offices that probably most of us work in. They have no desks that are assigned. They have no offices. It's completely flexible. It's nimble and it's fast. That's a different work environment for people to adjust to that are maybe over 30.
Well, permit me to say that I do think that Omaha would be a different place if we didn't have the CenturyLink Center, our convention arena center here. It's the same kind of idea. What about the university, Hank?
Yeah, so
The space place concept as you look at economically putting this strategy together, does it fit? Do we have to work on this?
place absolutely matters. When you look at the places that are really growing around the country, they've paid attention to educational outcomes, but they've also paid attention to arts and culture. They've paid attention to sports. You know, we don't have mountains here. We don't have beaches here. And so we've got to be creative about how we sell ourselves to young people, how we create environments. I mean, if you are an entrepreneur, you want to be in an ecosystem where there are people that think like you, that, you know, you go and have a beer after work and you're talking about how to solve a problem. And so figuring out how to put lots of people together, so buildings matter, space matters, place really matters.
So I'm going to take the strategy idea, which we want to invite everyone here to be alert to the ways they can input their ideas over the next year to this very important effort, and space being, to me, a real wraparound to a lot of this, because we have what your description of the university is a 500-mile-wide campus. We have 1,000 pieces of property in the university system. We have a lot to manage, 52,000 students. We'd like to keep as many of those graduates here as we can, so the workplace of the future is going to have to be accommodated. Let's change subjects and talk a little bit about that, about workforce development. Is that another one of the keys to this strategy that we're talking about? And why don't we start maybe, Hank, with that idea, and then have each of our panelists.
Yeah, so when I talk to business leaders across the state, they say, Hank, let me tell you the three big issues for my company. Number one is workforce, number two is workforce, and oh, by the way, if you're not listening to me, number three is workforce. And then I'll give you four, take care of housing so that we can deal with workforce. In a state in a really fairly large geographic state with a small number of people, we have 3 times the national average, the number of people that are working more than one job. And so one of our, when you talk about comprehensive tax relief, one of the best ways to deal with tax relief is to go from 1.8 million people to 2.8 million people.
Sure.
That's also one of the ways that we really think differently about how to bring in jobs and opportunities so that more Nebraskans want to stay here. Our birth to age 20 population is actually flat, and so we're probably not going to grow much there, so we've got to be very thoughtful about how we attract, and number one, how do we maintain the companies that we already have, but number two, how do we attract high-end companies that pay well so that we can attract people to come here. People won't move here for $12 an hour jobs.
Does the vocational piece fit, though? Does the vocational level provide an opportunity for us to not only have a stable workforce, but to train that particular piece of the workforce for the better paying jobs?
Yeah, so this is really not about the university. Workforce is not solely about the university. The fact of the matter is we need more education in the state and not less. We need more work from the community college system, training individuals, retraining them for better job opportunities. We need Nebraskans to be qualified to go into better jobs. And so this is when we talk about focusing on a strategic plan for the state, workforce will be absolutely at the core of what we do, and all sectors of the education community will be heavily engaged.
David, how do you see that?
Oh, we've got a talent pipeline that we've got to manage much better than we have been. Frankly, if we just captured 20% more of the individuals are graduating from our college campuses in the state and kept them here, we would have solved 25% or 30% of our talent problem. Because we have a lot of folks who we educate them. It costs somewhere, the number I've heard recently is somewhere between $250,000 and $300,000 a person from K through 12 and then 16 of public money that goes into that education. And then many of them leave. So first off, if we can figure out a way to have more and more of the graduates from the Nebraska system, from all the colleges and universities in the state, we need to manage that much better. And there's some great examples of how to do that. Secondly, we've got blue-collar and gray-collar jobs that are going unfilled right now. The great sucking sound we always hear is all the electricians going to work at Google. Now all the electricians are coming to work at Facebook. But one way or another, there aren't enough people in the blue-collar space or the gray-collar space to fill the jobs that are available in this market. And we've got to rely upon the community college system and a more aggressive effort to get more of those folks trained so they can get out of the part-time job market and get into the full-time job market with benefits.
So Clay, do we need to have a piece of this strategy be some legislative work on the incentives that may be necessary on the worker side, not the business side?
You know, I think he actually articulated a very purposeful approach. He didn't use the word plagiarism because I know in academia that's probably not looked on positively. But we're going to, in this plan, look at the best plans around the country.
Just borrow other good ideas.
Borrow good ideas and put them to work here for Nebraska, in Nebraska. I'm really delighted that the university and Hank is taking the lead on this, because think about your own life. Post-secondary education. Before that, you were on a certain path. You got to college and or to grad school, you changed your life. You were on a different path. That's the opportunity set, and having the university involved with the research and also that path changing that can happen. And it could be at the community college, it could be at a state college, it could be at the university, at all those levels. But the incentives for job creation, I think job development and workforce development is the key issue in the whole plan.
If I could jump in here, Hal, I want to make sure we remember that people move to cities, move to places for two primary reasons: family first and career second. So we got to have an opportunity for people to look at us as a place that they can actually have a career, which means we got to be a competitive place for businesses to offer those jobs that we want. And so while I 100% agree with Clay that our incentive plan, the Nebraska Advantage Act, which frankly between the Lincoln Chamber and the Omaha Chamber, we authored that thing about 13 years ago, and we've been changing it every year, that's only one half of the coin. The other half of the coin is we got to be competitive. The only reason we have to offer the level of incentives that we offer is because our tax policy stinks. And so you got to have lots of incentives in order to counterbalance high taxes. We got to have a policy, which is going to be part of the discussion in this Blueprint Nebraska. What should the tax structure look like in this state to cover the needs that we have? How can we reduce it to a competitive level, which then enables us to reduce the amount of incentives we have to offer and target those incentives in places we need to get something very specific done. So I agree 100%, Clay. People is our number one issue. We're not going to be able to attract the people here if we don't have the jobs that they are looking for. And to get those jobs, we got to make it more competitive for businesses to make money here.
We've talked about one subject called Blueprint Nebraska, but it overlays with those two key things, the space, place idea and the way in which we look at workforce development. We've got 10 minutes left, and I'm wondering if somebody's controlling the mic back there, if there isn't a question or two that someone might have, or an observation or an idea that they'd like to go to a microphone and let us hear what's on your mind.
Barry's up front there.
Awfully hard to see past the
Barry's
glare
got
of the
one.
lights, but Barry? Yes. Barry who? Zoom.
As you reach the years that I've reached, you tend to look after your kids and your grandkids. What I've seen most recently is the lack of commitment to the education of our youth, both in public schools, from grammar school to high school, as well as at the university level. The jobs of our educators much more difficult. How does that fit into your plan?
Could you catch what he said?
Yeah, so the question, as I understand it, is lack of commitment to education in general, K-12 or higher ed, There does seem to be some cultural change around that. I don't know how to answer that other than to say that, I grew up in a very poor area in Mississippi. I never thought that I would have the opportunity to go to college. And the fact that I'm sitting on this stage as president of one of America's great public universities really does speak to the transformative power of higher education. And I think that is as true today as it was 30 years ago. And to not recognize that and embrace that and invest in it in a way so that all Nebraskans, all Americans can be a part of that American dream, for me is just criminal. We absolutely have to figure out how to change the culture so that kindergarten teachers are absolutely valued. We know that students, we have a growing number of 5-year-olds entering Omaha public schools that aren't prepared to be a kindergartner. And the research, the data is abundantly clear. If you're not ready to go into kindergarten, you're probably not going to be reading proficiently by the end of the 3rd grade. And if that happens, you're probably not going to get a college education. You're exponentially more likely to go to prison, drop out of high school. And so we absolutely, as a state and as a nation, have to really get focused on good educational outcomes for all boys and girls in this country.
What is the data point, Hank, of the future job requirements in Nebraska in the next 10 years are going to require the college education for how many of the jobs that are going to come?
70% of all jobs in a decade from now in the state of Nebraska will require some college, some education beyond high school.
Beyond high school. Is there another hand? Or I don't want to miss anybody because it's kind of hard to see from right here.
Shy.
I think, unless my colleagues, whom I personally want to thank for being a part of this closing panel at this great CRE conference, for making time to come and share your thoughts and ideas with all of us, and thank all of you for letting us come into your living room this afternoon. Thank you.
We came to smash, smash. We came to smash. We came to smash, smash. We came to smash.
We're adjourned.
Cocktails are available. Tell them the Slusky tab. And anyway, we're adjourned. Thanks for attending. About 20 minutes, Bill Moose will be here to talk to us. Thank you.
We came to smash. In a black tux, we came to smash.
Hi, it's Rolling.
I'm sorry, Charlie Murphy. I was having too much fun.